Today guys, this episode's a little bit different. This is more like a how-to video. One of the questions that we get asked most is, what kind of equipment do we use underwater? How do we get such great underwater videography shots? And there's a lot to it, but it's also quite basic as well. You know, it's not that hard if you have the right tools in hand. So that's what all today's episode is, more of like a conversation from us to you.
We are also going to talk about the differences between wide angle and macro camera videography. And also we're going to show you how to make this footage look like this footage.
Awesome, guys.
Yeah.
We're really excited to share all this info with you guys. We've been talking about doing this episode for a long time actually. So you aspiring videographers, we're here to help you out. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. But with that said, let's get right into it, guys. So today we're going to be talking about how to get your footage underwater to look better. And probably one of the questions we get asked the most is, what gear do we use? What cameras do we use? What lighting do we use? How do we achieve the kind of shots that we get? And yeah, so I thought we would talk about that today, and I hope that it helps you out if you're an underwater shooter or if you aspire to be one. I think that this would give you a lot of tips, things that I've learned from years of painstaking hard work and failures and everything else in between. I do want to point out today that we're just talking about videography. We're not talking about photography, so a lot of what you'll learn today does not apply to photography, just so you know that. And also I want to point out that none of this is sponsored. I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm just going to tell you what we use that works the best for us. If you do want to check out where that gear is, you can go to our website, expeditiondrenched.org, and there you'll see brands we love, and you can see all of the different gear that I'll be talking about today if you did want to buy some. So that'll help you search it out. So let's talk about underwater videography. So we currently use Sony A7 IIIs, okay? And they are a great mirrorless, all-around awesome camera, and they have a huge sensor, and to us, we love that they do slow-mo video. So that's why we've chosen them. But before we start talking about cameras, I do want to point out my personal journey with underwater videography and photography, and really like how I got to where I am today with that. Because I, just like a lot of people, just got a really crummy camera and just started shooting. And that's really what you got to do. You just had just time in the seat using the camera you have, because the camera you have is better than no camera. I feel like a lot of people don't get started because they just don't think they have all the right equipment, and they're not going to invest 13 grand into a new setup to get there. You don't need to do that. So yeah, here's a couple of my first photos when I was a guide in Maui. I was using a really not my favorite setup, to be honest with you. It's a Sea Life camera with their strobes, and soon after I upgraded and got a Sony RX100, the first model of that. And I had a Nauticam housing. I'll talk about Nauticam housing soon, but that camera is relatively cheap. I think they've got 6 or 7 versions of that out now, and I think it's maybe like 800 bucks or 1,000 bucks for the camera, another 1,000 bucks for the housing. So you are invested in it to about $2,000. I want to point out that just recently, my Octopus Teacher, that awesome documentary, which you should see if you haven't seen it already, that was filmed mostly with a Sony RX100. So just to give you an idea that you could have professional quality video without spending an arm and a leg. Shoot it in auto, you know, without having to know everything about cameras and video. It's fine. It does a heck of a great job, and there's a good sensor on it as well. And there, I used that camera through when I used to guide and do video work for the Kona Night Manta Ray dive, which is an amazing experience. And that was part of my journey. Is I actually just started out filming manta rays at night, and then I would just sell videos to customers, honestly. And I started making more money doing that than I did as a dive guide or as a dive instructor. So that was like the beginning of like, okay, I really enjoy underwater videography, and it's my passion, and I want to move into that and less into teaching and guiding. But when people ask what kind of camera should I get, I always try to steer people away from buying a really expensive camera and actually going more expensive on their lighting, because to me, you can make pretty much any camera, any footage look really good with better lighting. I would go as far as to say that this GoPro right here with really good quality lights is going to be better than this really expensive camera with really inexpensive cheap lights. So if you're going to invest in one or the other, I would actually go with a cheap camera with good lights just on a tray, so that you can light up your subject so it illuminates and you get good color out of it. That's be the first thing that I would tell you, okay? But it's not going to be as diverse. You're not going to be able to do everything that you can do with this setup, but definitely go for the lights. So let's talk about lighting really quick, okay? So these Keldons right here, wow, that's bright. I shouldn't do that. These guys right here put out 18,000 lumens of light, and the color spectrum is, in my mind, the most professional. It has the vivid colors that you're looking for. The colors are more natural to what they normally would be, and it just does a heck of a good job. And as you can see, they really illuminate like a big reef or anything, but they only have a range. We got to be semi close to them because they are wide angle lights. We'll talk about other methods about how to make things look natural underwater without lights later on, but these are run and gun lights. Absolutely love them. I've used them from the beginning, ever since doing the manta dives, and I couldn't recommend them more. They're just a great all-around light. But these lights are about $2,500 US each, which means you're spending $5 grand for a pair of them. And if you're not ready to, if you're just doing this for a hobby, or you're not ready to invest that kind of money, I absolutely agree and understand, okay? So here we have Sola Video Pro lights. These things put out about 8,000 lumens, and they still do a great job. And what's nice about them is, unlike the Keldons, these guys do more of a spot position, so they actually reach a little bit further out. I don't think they have quite as good of a color spectrum, but they seem to go a little bit farther, so they have a use for us when we talk about them pairing with our cameras. That's a great light. These guys right here are more about the $1,000 range, I believe. You can get them on sale for around that price. That's each, so you're not spending near as much as you would as on the Keldons, okay? And these lights right here are called Nemos. It's a great company, and these are brand new on the market. What's nice about these is they do 15,000 lumens, so almost as bright as our Keldons, but they are only $400 in comparison to our $2,500 Keldons. So you could have a pretty professional rig right here with only spending $800 on lights as opposed to $5,000. So if you're just getting into the game, I would actually say give these a try. Okay, they might not have the amazing color spectrum that the Keldons do, but they certainly, you want to light up a reef, 15,000 lumens is more than enough. And some things that I like that the other ones actually don't have is it has a black light setting. A lot of reefs and creatures underwater have their own bioluminescence and fluorescent colors that you just can't see with the naked eye. So I've kind of gotten into filming now with black light. It's just a fun another skill to have. It's really cool when you find like yellow cup coral or something that does glow. You can light up like a whole shipwreck with these black lights, and it's really cool. Another great thing about these lights that the other lights don't have is if you buy the secondary battery, which is extra, you can actually underwater change out the battery to another battery. And then so you've got kind of like a low battery light. You still go dive, just put another battery in your pocket, switch it out when it dies, and just keep on shooting, guys. So that is why I think that these, even though they're new on the market, I think that they have a place. And if you're just getting into the game and you really want a good setup, check those out. And then lastly, we have, these are Light and Motion Solas. So same company as our Sola Video Pro lights, but smaller versions. And you'll see that they are different, okay? This one right here is wide angle. Okay, so it's for our wide angle setup, and this one does wide angle and it also does spotlight. So it spotlights to a fine point. And here we actually have a modified, this is called a snoot. Usually snoots are only for photography on strobes, but we have found one that is for video lights. And I love this because what a snoot does is it actually blacks out the entire background except for your subject. So if you find like a nudibranch or something like that, you can angle it down and have the snoot just light up just the nudibranch and everything else is black around it, which is really, really cool. So these we use kind of like as a filler light on the middle of our rig, of our camera, so that it can fill in the blank spot if our lights are too far out and if we get too close to the subject. This is what that's for. So. This is our wide angle setup. This is the one, like every dive, you have to have your wide angle. You can't have just dive footage that's just macro dive, because to set the scene, you definitely need to have your wide angle. So here we have our Sony a7 III with a wide angle lens on it, and it goes in our Nauticam housing. And why we use Nauticam housing is, you know, they're just lower profile, they're smaller, and you have complete access to all the settings that you would have with the camera out of the housing. So it's just a little bit more intuitive than other housings that I've dealt with. It has less drag and it has less air inside of it. So it's not like weirdly buoyant or something like that. It's not a huge brick that you're dragging through the water with you. So I've used Nauticam housings since the beginning. Absolutely love them. And yeah, that's just what we use. So on top of your housing, you actually have to have a port and then another lens as well. So here we have, this is a wide angle lens on our housing. So even though we have a wide angle lens on our camera, we actually have another wide angle lens on our housing. This is a WWL1 lens, so it's a wet lens, which means you can actually take this bad boy off underwater and put her back on. Actually, I do take it off underwater sometimes just to get the bubbles out. Sometimes a bubble will get lodged in there. You can take the lens off while you're underwater if something's a little further away, but I don't recommend that because then you're holding this, and this is like 800 bucks. You don't want to drop it. You'll notice again we have our Keldon 8Xs on this setup. So again, that's 18,000 lumens each. And something I really want to point out to everybody is, I think this is where a lot of videographers go wrong early on, is your setup. Okay, you need to have good buoyancy. You need to have good arms that have float arms, so that this whole rig isn't like super heavy. So it's important that even though these Nauticam float arms are a little bit pricey for what they are, they're lifesavers. You know, I can let go of this camera underwater and it just sits there and floats in front of me. So it's not too heavy and dragging me down, it's not bringing me to the surface, because if it's like that, it's tiring and it's hard to keep your shot steady. And the most important thing with shooting underwater is just good buoyancy in general, so you can get those good shots. You might be wondering what these blue filters are. We'll get into that in a little bit. Right now I'm just going to talk about lighting. Here's where I think a lot of new videographers go wrong, and that is the way that they position their actual lights. Okay, so what you need to do is you actually need to take your lights and you need to angle them ever so slightly out. Okay, so be looking at your screen, and when you're looking at your screen, you want it where the light in the center, the lights kind of converge on the center point, but without converging and overlapping each other where it gets super bright in the center, where they're just barely touching. But you want them angled out, and there's a reason for that, is if you were to have these straight forward like this, undoubtedly all water has little plankton and particles in it, and you're going to get reflection. Think about it when you're driving through snow. Okay? If you're driving through snow with your headlights on, you put your high beams on, that gets reflected right back at you. Same thing happens with your underwater lights. But if you angle them out, what will happen is we'll hit those things in the water, the little particles, and it will reflect them out that way. Okay? Not back right at your lens. And then we have here in the center, we have a solo light. This is that wide angle one I was talking about earlier, and that just fills the gap. So if you get really close to a subject and these are like a little bit too far out, you want this to fill that gap so you can illuminate maybe a turtle or something right in front of you. We do film everything in S&Q for the most part, and S&Q is just slow motion. We'd like to film things in slow motion because you can still speed it up when you're editing it, but it just gives this beautiful feel to the footage where everything just has these nice slow movements. Life is better in slow-mo, guys. It gives it that cinematic look to it, so I definitely recommend shooting in slow-mo. Now there's a lot of other settings on your camera, guys. There's ISO settings, aperture settings. I could talk about that, honestly. That's just knowing your camera. So you should probably watch some YouTube videos on learning your specific camera and what those things mean before you start to try to shoot underwater. So the only setting that I'll talk about is we're going to talk about white balance today. We're going to talk about slow-mo and shooting in auto. Don't be afraid, like honestly at the beginning, just focus on getting the shot in auto. Focus on your buoyancy and your lighting position. Once you've got that mastered, then you can go ahead and start shooting in manual and start changing your lighting settings and all of that to your heart's desire. But it's more important that at the beginning you just get a feel for diving with a rig in your hand, positioning your lighting, start with the basics, and then start moving into changing all those settings, which you can do, of course, with your Nauticam housing. So watch those tutorial videos on how to use your specific camera before we get into that. But from here, let's talk about our second rig. Let's talk about macro and our macro setup. So macro is just small critters, small creatures, small things that you want to film. And macro can be a lot of fun because even on a dive that you feel like you're not seeing a lot, I can almost guarantee you that on any dive, if you start looking for smaller things, you will find a treasure trove of life down there that is very interesting. So a lot of times when I am talking about filming underwater and just scuba diving in general, I would recommend people go a little bit slower than they think they should. Look down and stop, you don't always have to be looking up for whales and big sharks because sometimes the best stuff is right under your nose. That's what macro videography is all about. So this is our macro setup again, Sony a7 III with a macro lens on it, okay? And you'll notice that our macro setup looks just a little bit different because this is a very long lens. It's going to go into our Nauticam housing. Let's throw that up in there. And why do we have different kind of light setup? Let's talk about that. So that gets plopped in there just like the wide angle. Intuitive housing, you can get to all of the different settings on this thing, and these Sony Video Pros that again I think do 8,000 lumens, they shoot a little bit farther. So there's almost two ways of shooting with this specific setup. You've got your macro, and then you've got one without, and you can actually shoot things a little bit farther with this lens setup than you can with wide angle. So let's say you have a shark that is, I don't know, maybe 5 meters away. So it's a little bit of a distance, not quite where your light's going to get. Sometimes this will do better from getting those far distances than the wide angle will. And these light setup will actually get a little bit farther distance than our wide angle setup will in general. So this setup right here, it's not good when you want to like shoot a reef or a big wall that you want to show the entire reef. It's good for two things when you want to get stuff that is either a little bit further away or really close. So there's not a real like a mid-range on this one. And this light right here is when you're shooting macro. Okay, the first thing I can tell you about shooting macro is being patient. I like to try to get up real close to the subject, put my macro lens on, and I try my best to shoot up at things, especially nudibranchs, and try to get that contrast where it's not just shooting down on something. I try to get the contrast of a little bit of sky in it or something like that, which I think, if it's possible, if your subject is placed right, that those make a more compelling photo or video than if you're just shooting down on things. This light right here is to illuminate that right here, because shooting it with the outside lights, it's not really going to work for you. you need to have a really good light right up on top, and so that's what that one is for. What I would typically do is I would film it not on macro, and it does take a moment to really get it dialed in and to get it focused. Once I've gotten it that way, then I throw the old macro on. I shoot it the other way first, just before maybe I scare the subject away. I like to film it, and then if it's being chill with me at that moment, then I finally get the macro lens on and I zoom in for a little bit of a closer look, okay? So that's what this setup's all about, and it really requires to have two shooters to really show the whole dive from beginning to end, everything that happens. Let's say that we're doing like a drift dive and we're looking for sharks, okay? What I would say is your one shooter is of course going to be on wide angle, so that if you get close to those sharks, you got those beautiful shots. But then the macro camera becomes a little bit less important, because honestly, you know you're not going to get, you know, this close to the shark. I hope you do, but probably not. So then this setup becomes a little bit more obsolete. So what we'll do is we leave the macro off, the macro lens off, and we shoot like this. And what I would suggest is, so you got your lights, again, remembering to angle them out so you don't have that snow effect coming back at you. And then a lot of times we'll simply put a GoPro right up on top. And why we do this is because if you're shooting on the macro setup, on a drift dive, looking for big things, you know no macro things are going to happen. Oh man, if you're in the position where that shark comes up close to you, or whale shark, whatever it might be, and you've only got the macro set up and it comes that close to you, it's disheartening when you were in position for the shot and then your second shooter, the wide angle guy, is in a different spot and you didn't get the shot because you didn't have it. So we've learned to usually just, you know, throw a GoPro back up on there. No shame in that game, guys. And now we're going to talk about really, I think, what the key to what Expedition Drenched does, why we're able to get such great footage on a single dive we do, and that is because we don't just have one videographer in the water, we have two. That's a recipe for success. I'll tell you all about why that's so important with my main man, Aitor, right now. One of the things that I think that we do really well as a crew is that we film underwater with two shooters, which is very uncommon. And a lot of times, like, I meet a couple that are both doing video, that you'll see that both of them are on wide angle or something like that. And for us to get all angles of a dive really makes it kind of show the whole picture of everything that is going on underwater, on that reef, on that wreck, on that dive. And you can only do that with an array of different setups. So if I was to do a dive just with wide angle, it really wouldn't show the whole picture, and it certainly wouldn't show the whole picture if it was just on macro. So we've got Aitor here, and Aitor, what would you say, like, when we're on our different rigs, like when you're on the macro rig, like how do you film differently than you would on the wide angle?
Yeah, especially because I am filming more very small things or animals or small details. I looking down. That's how I dive usually, looking for little things, and of course his way to dive is very different. He's looking the landscape, the views, and the big things.
And because of that, it's important that we're communicating, because let's say that I'm diving along and I happen to see a little pipefish or something that is very small. My lens cannot actually get it. I cannot capture appropriately that animal. So I need to communicate with Aitor, and that is why we actually wear our OTS masks. A lot of people ask, why do you guys dive with these all the time? It's actually so we can just talk and communicate underwater. Hey, this is over here. Hey, that's over there. Which is so much better than like banging and like, you know, it's just better to be like, hey, got a pipefish. If you were to see a wobbegong underwater, what would you do first before getting me?
Yeah, as Nate says, we work as a team to do all these different types of footage. And he films the size of the wobbegong, the whole animal, and then I catch the little details, the pattern of the skin.
So yeah, I would say if you have the ability if you have a friend that's into it, talk, and we go back and forth. Like, it's always like, you want to be on the wide angle, you want to be on the macro, like.
Yeah. Usually lately I like more doing macro, but yeah, we change that things usually, and yeah.
They're challenging.
Very different challenges for both.
No matter what lighting setup you have, there's going to be a certain point where your lights no longer matter, and or it's just going to look better if you try to shoot it with just correcting the white balance. So let's talk about that. Aitor, you want to talk about white balance and how we do that?
You know, the ambient light, white light has all the colors there, from the red to green and blue and to the purple, all of them. But the water starts to absorb first the red color, then the orange and the yellow. So the deeper that you go, it starts to disappear, all those colors. Imagine that we are in 10 meters deep, and we tell the camera, okay, this is white. So he starts to set up all the colors again, because what you see underwater in 10 meters, 20 meters is kind of blue, green. Above 5 meters, the ambient light, the white light is beautiful to film, for example, a turtle and everything, and you start losing this natural white ambient light when you go deeper and deeper. Also as well, not always, because I'm used to use all the time the lights for a macro, for little things. When it's something like more than 2 or 3 meters away from me and I want to film that, I also use white balance in my macro camera, but it's not a very common thing. Maybe it can happen once every dive or less. It's way more useful, common things to use here.
Yeah, so when it's just out of range of your video lights, that's when you're going to want to white balance it, for sure. So most cameras today have some sort of way of very quickly changing the white balance. And what we use is we just use the slate, actually. So we have this connected to us, we hold the slate out, and or our dive tanks are actually white. All you need to do is find anything white, get up close to it, and change the setting on your camera where you say, that's the white balance. And you'll see it. It takes a photo of it quick, and then you move the camera and you'll notice right away that the colors are just better. They're never going to be as good as if you were to get really close to the subject and illuminate it with your lights, but for those things where it's just a little bit out of light range, a shark that's not going to get that close does a really fantastic job. So much so that we've had absolutely green water, just cloudy as, and you do the white balance also and you're like, whoa. I can't tell you how often we shoot something and it looks better than it did with your real eyeballs.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you just come up, you're like, nailed that one, right? The thing with white balance, as he's saying, is like, as you're going down, up or down, it's continually changing. You go down a meter or 2 meters, it's gonna need to be changed. So it kind of becomes this second nature, the same as just breathing, where you know you went down a meter, you know you went down a couple feet, and you want to do this really quick. I try to do it often because you never know. You never know where you're just sitting there, all of a sudden, manta ray comes right over the top of your head. So it's good to always be prepared when you're shooting with that. So you might be wondering what these blue filters are about. You only are going to use your blue filter when you're using white balance. So yeah, if your subject is a certain place and you just did your white balance and it's looking pretty good, but you realize now you've gotten close enough that you could actually illuminate it with your lights, go ahead and do so. But if you were to do it without the blue filters, don't forget that you've now taught your camera that this is white, so it's actually going to pick up that your lights are red. So they're going to look red on your screen, red on your footage. So you put these blue filters on so that you can change that red color hue to now being more of a natural light again. So that's when you would use the blue. So when you're doing white balance and you're filming close, so this one far, you end up doing your white balance a lot, and then you end up actually taking these filters on and off a lot. So again, that's why I recommend knowing your camera first, knowing your rig, knowing how to set up your lights, really getting good at that craft, and then finally that's when you can get into maybe doing the white balance a little bit more. Lastly, what I would say, if you really want to get just beautiful colors, you want to get and I think a good way to practice to get good at videography is actually to start diving more at night. Because if you dive at night, you're only relying on your lights, and you just have to have them on low. You turn them on bright, it's way too bright. Everything's going to be those great colors. The night things end up letting you get a little bit closer for filming them, and you'll really start to understand that snow globe effect I'm talking about, and you'll understand how important it is to angle your lights out just a little bit so that you don't have that reflection back at you. So that's really all the tips we got for you guys. Like, here's the gear we use, here's how we communicate underwater, here's how you can better your underwater footage, and we don't know everything. We're always learning. Still to this day, we'll be learning. And as technology advances, it's just going to continue to be so. So if you have other tips or tricks that we didn't mention, feel free to put them in the comments.
Yes, yes.
We're going to go through the comments on this. If you have a lot of questions, we'll be diligent about answering those for you guys. And don't forget that if you do want to check out any of the gear that we currently use, just head over to our new website, expeditiondrenched.org. There you can find all of the different gear that we use, and that will maybe help you build your own setup. Or don't be shy, email us, ask us. We'll be more than happy to answer those for you. So with that said, we hope you guys have a blast filming underwater, and hope you guys enjoy what we do. We love sharing our passion of the underwater creatures, and I think that's why we do what we do, right?
Yeah, share with you all what's happening also below the water surface.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to film it and bring it to you.
It's all about setting the scene, guys. Filming above water, drones, underwater, different areas, and that's really what pulls a story together with good B-roll. So get out there, keep shooting, guys. Hope to dive with you one day.